Hello, I am Mamadou Chan. Welcome to the Viewpoint. Today we are guests of Ebunjan Theatre here on the lovely front lawn of the theatre. This is where we've come to. You know, sometimes it's good to get out of our studios and go around to wonderful areas where we can have a nice scenic settings, as it were. Today, we're going to talk about something extremely important in our history in 100 years' time when historians reflect. But still, this event, what happened here, as we reckon that it will still hold a significant attention. It will be seen as a significant event in the annals of our history. One of the key mechanisms, really, in our transitional justice process has been really the TRRC, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, which submitted its report in November after 2 years of hearings from more than 300 witnesses. Submitted its report in November. 6 months later, as was required in law, the government published its white paper that it's going to do. So today, I have my guest here, as someone who's been a personality who's been key, who's been at the heart of the TRRC by training and experience, a journalist, an academic. Actually was a university professor before he took up the job of being executive secretary of the TRRC. So I have him here, Dr. Baba Gale Jallow. Welcome to the Viewpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Much.
That's it. After 2 years, extraordinary, and the way it was formed, you know, difficult circumstances. We were reading regularly, where would the money come from? How would we frame it? Even the experimentation with the TRRC concept, whereas others, they just have TRCs and the like. After 2 years, 17 volumes, you're done, you did your report, 17 volumes, I think, something like that. You submitted, and then there was the white paper. Your responses, your reactions to all of these things, being the executive secretary of the commission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mboch. I think it was a very gratifying experience for me and for the commissioners and the staff and the entire country. I think that we were very happy to see that the process went well. Everything went well, literally. And the report was a bit delayed, but it was submitted, as you said, in November 2021. And then, going by the TRRC Act, the government published the report a month later and then issued a white paper 6 months later. All that according to the TRRC Act. And they have committed to implementing the recommendations. So essentially, I would say it has been a very gratifying experience for me.
That's it.
Yeah.
So here, let's take a retrospective. I think now it's only proper that we do that. When you were taking it, you were at where? LaSalle University?
That's right.
Absolutely. So why did you take it?
Well, essentially, I did not apply for this job. I was kind of what they call headhunted. I was in Philadelphia one day, and I received a call from the former Justice Minister, Batambedu. And he said to me, well, Baba, we are creating this TRRC, and we've been looking around for someone to come and head the Secretariat. And we think that you would be a perfect candidate for this job. Would you be interested in coming over and helping us? And I did not hesitate. I said yes. Although I was on the verge of being tenured and promoted at LaSalle, the next semester I was going to come up for tenure and promotion. But I said I can't miss this opportunity to go and serve my country in that capacity. And so I asked Batambedu to write to my head of department. He did that. And LaSalle University was very gracious. They granted me a 2-year leave of absence to come and take up this job. I took the job up like that. I came home in late 2017, and I was appointed on February 1st of 2018. And after 2 years, my leave of absence expired. That was December 2020. And of course, the work of the commission wasn't completed. And I couldn't get the leave extended. And so I had to resign because I couldn't leave the job here and go back to America. So I resigned from my position at LaSalle and stayed on and completed the job. So essentially, I was headhunted, and I did not apply for the job.
Absolutely. So that's it. So when you got here, or perhaps just before you got here, what did you think the job was going to be like? Or rather, more broadly, I can imagine such a response. God, what does it mean for a society to have a truth commission like that? What has happened to my society? You know, that sort of thing. What would it mean for a society to have something like that? So what were you coming to? How did you see that?
Well, essentially, truth commissions are not a new phenomenon in world history. The first thing I did was do a lot of research on truth commissions. As a university professor, I'm naturally inclined to do research. So I did a lot of research, found out about truth commissions that happened in Latin America, which is the home of truth commissions, really, and found out about truth commissions that happened in Africa and in other parts of the world. And essentially what truth commissions do is that they help a society face a past of massive human rights violations with a view to investigating and bringing out the truth and creating a historical record of what happened, and then at the end of the day, making recommendations for implementation by the government, recommendations on prosecutions, recommendations on social cohesion, reconciliation, reparations, and institutional reforms. So a society resorts to a truth commission after it undergoes a period of massive human rights violations, so that the people will get to know what happened and the society will come to terms with its violent past. So that is really the rationale behind truth commissions, with a view to making sure that it doesn't happen again, hence never again.
That's it. But in Gambia, you had your own slant on it, wasn't it? Perhaps the TRRC instead of really the Truth and Reparations Commission, but that was the so that's it. So talk us through why.
Yeah, essentially, I think we are the first, or among the first commissions to have reparations in the name of the commission. So our commission is not just Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it is Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. I think that was due to the forward-thinking nature of Batambedu, in particular, the former Justice Minister. I think he wanted to make sure that reparations are taken seriously and that victims get some form of reparations. And we were very fortunate in the TRRC in that the TRRC Act, our enabling legislation, actually had a clause that enabled the Commission to pay interim reparations. Now that was a very novel way of doing truth commissions. Normally truth commissions would finish their work and then recommend reparations. But the fact that we were able to pay reparations as the commission unfolded, as the process unfolded, was very, very instrumental in ensuring the success of the commission. And it enabled us to help a lot of victims in terms of medical attention, in terms of school fees, living expenses, and a lot of other things that we are able to do within the commission process, long before it ended, from the moment it started actually. And that is because we had reparations in the name, and then we were enabled by the TRRC Act to grant reparations as the commission unfolded.
The commission was moving forward. Yeah. But I heard certain sort of skeptical voices, especially with the reconciliation bit, that bit. Most of them would say stuff like, South Africa, there was apartheid. Society was really truly riven to the extent that they needed something like that. Be it Sierra Leone, there was the Civil War. There was all of that. Whereas in the Gambia, well, you've had this despot in power, but we were not riven along ethnic lines, nor regional lines. So what are we reconciling? In other words, perhaps get the truth, get justice, get reparations. Why the reconciliation? Perhaps there could be a loop, a way of some people to be given impunity.
Well, essentially, reconciliation doesn't mean encouraging impunity. I think the reconciliation, in the way that the TRRC conceptualized it and defined it, was broader than just the normal reconciliation between victim and perpetrator. And that is needed. We have seen, as the TRRC process unfolded, a lot of instances where perpetrators wanted to apologize to victims. And, we spoke to the victims. They were willing to hear the apologies, and some form of reconciliation was done. We have also helped in community reconciliation, where communities were reconciled, having been ripped apart due to political differences and the meddling of the former government in their communal affairs. But we took the concept of reconciliation even further. We believed that there was an anomaly between political perception in this country and political reality, between the nature of the nation-state system and the people's understanding of what government should be. And so reconciling the perception of the people regarding the government as Mansakunda or Ngur and the president as Mansa or Bur or King, with the reality that the Gambian state was a republic, was some form of reconciliation as well. And that was the crux of our launching of the Never Again campaign. We went out there and we were having conversations with people, telling them that the government is not a Mansakunda, that the president is not a king. So that is one of the enabling cultural factors of the dictatorship, and it needed to be addressed. And it could not be addressed during the hearings. It had to be addressed during the outreach activities. So from the very beginning, we are very deliberate in creating an approach, crafting an approach that was double-pronged. We had the hearings going on at the hall, and elsewhere. We went on regional hearings as well. But we also had the outreach activities that were part and parcel of the work of the commission, but concentrating on reconciling, among other things, the people's perception of government and politics and the reality of government and politics. I think reconciliation is important.
But this is interesting there, because of this binary that you're talking about, between people's perceptions and what is the reality, or even institutional life, what we want institutional life to be, and the normative, what we do. So you consider perhaps even, well, we've seen a public event that apparently people are reconciling. It's a public show. Yeah. How much of it is meant? How much of it is merely manipulative, just for the show? So the notion of reconciliation is a bit more complex, isn't it, than the mere coming onto TV and having a ceremony to say that we've reconciled. And you've already said it. We can say one thing about things, the normative bit, but institutionally what we want, it is this contradiction perhaps that's been extremely difficult in this place. No wonder that you went on a campaign of awareness to change attitudes. So how much weight would you give to the ceremonies of so-called reconciliation?
Well, I wouldn't call them so-called reconciliation. I think that the whole process would start during the TRRC process when a perpetrator approaches the commission and says, I want to apologize to my victims. And then the next step would be that the commission would then approach the victims and say, this guy who tortured you says he wants to apologize, he wants to reconcile with you. And if the victim agreed to that kind of reconciliation, then we would make it happen. If the victim says, no, I'm not interested in reconciling with this guy, it wouldn't happen. So all of the ceremonies that you saw, that you covered, QTV was our primary, was our media partner. You covered everything. All of those ceremonies were actually brought about, were actually held after there was a explicit agreement by the victims to reconcile. And I think there was an element of healing in that. It is empowering for a victim to have somebody who was at one point torturing and doing horrible things to them, showing them power, come and literally almost kneel before them and shake their hands and say, I'm sorry. That is healing, that is therapeutic. And I wouldn't say that the reconciliation ceremonies that we held were merely for show. They were not for show. They were real. They brought about some healing, especially on the part of the victims, but also on the part of the perpetrators. Because if you do something bad to somebody and then you are allowed, the person allows you to say, I'm sorry, it might be helpful in helping you regain your humanity, at least that part of your humanity that you lost.
Yeah, that's interesting. We're going to come to that, whether knowing the truth and apology may necessarily lead to reconciliation. But first, imagine in situations where there are deaths. Who can speak for the dead?
Who can speak for the dead? Well, no one can speak for the dead, but someone has to speak for the dead. Because if you killed my father is not here, of course, he can't talk, but I can talk on his behalf. It would not be helpful to say that because the person is dead, therefore, no one can do anything about it.
But surely the only meaningful sorry is to the person that you've done wrong. You know what I mean? And it has to be direct in these cases. I am not sure in such a situation where it will be very funny how a daughter can really forgive on behalf of a dead parent. I'm not sure.
Well, it's actually debatable. I think if the person is not alive and their loved one is there, they could choose to say, we forgive you. I've seen recently, I watched a very moving video of a father whose son was killed, whose only son was killed, and the murderer was sitting in court being sentenced, and the father decided to come forward and say, I forgive you for killing my son. You cannot say, I forgive you for killing that person per se, because that is between you and him. But you can say, I forgive you for killing my father, because he's my father, or he's my son, or he's my spouse.
So for that pain that you've caused me,
exactly, I
forgive you.
The act of murder itself, that cannot be forgiven.
So that's between you and God, isn't it, really?
Yes.
To that level. We've got our own human justice,
right,
granted,
right,
but there's a level as well, I think, which we want to invoke.
Right.
I think is between you and
So even if somebody forgives somebody for killing their relative, it doesn't mean that you will be absolved from standing trial for that same crime that you committed. Yeah. That's
it. So I sort of have this sort of slightly naughty question. The commission, what was it? A confessor or inquisitor?
Well, it was neither a confessor nor an inquisitor, because both of them are kind of extreme. It was a truth-seeking mechanism that was designed to bring out the truth of what happened, to create a true historical record of what happened, to pay reparations to the victims, to help with reconciliation, and to some extent to recommend amnesty where it deems fit.
But so the truth will make you free. That sounds very much like a confessor thing. You go to your priest, go to wherever, this religious leader, confess. That's, that confessor role, that religious role was very much alive from the elite council. The truth will set you free, constantly repeating it. So maybe that was why the naughtiness, that was the gap that I used for the naughtiness to come in. So there was that element, sure.
Right. Certainly there was that element of people being encouraged to come forward and tell the truth, because it was a truth-seeking mechanism. So if you could tell people, if you tell the truth, you could feel better, then that's part of the commission's identity. But it doesn't define the commission. It doesn't make the commission a confessor. The commission was much bigger than even the truth-seeking element alone. There were many other aspects to it, like, for instance, the Never Again campaign was about telling the truth about what happened, but it was bigger than that. So it had an element of, people being encouraged to tell the truth. The truth will set you free. That's precisely why the commission was out, but it doesn't define the commission in totality.
Absolutely. But I've read certain, maybe one would call them critics, but surely they will see themselves as students of these things. I'm saying stuff like the idea that knowing the truth will necessarily lead to conclusion, or will necessarily lead to reconciliation. We really do not have any evidence for that.
Absolutely.
It's merely speculative. It is based on an optimistic as it were, view that when you tell people the truth, then maybe that could bring in reconciliation, resolution, if you like. But really, we have no evidence for that.
Well, yes, at some level, yes. Knowing the truth doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. But then it depends on the type of reconciliation you're talking about. Also, there is also, in the thinking of the Commission, a reconciliation between the unknown and the known. So if you don't know something, now Gambians are reconciled to the knowledge of what happened here. That is a form of reconciliation. It's not necessarily reconciliation between you and me or between victim and perpetrator, but within the mind, what the mind knows and what the mind doesn't know. So reconciling the past of the Gambia with the minds of the Gambian people is what the Commission was trying to do. Bring about knowledge, bring about how someone was killed, how the migrants were led from here to here. You know, that is some form of reconciliation too. You see, reconciliation is not a monolithic concept. It's a very diverse and complex concept that you can apply to different situations. And that is precisely the way that the Commission approached this work.
Yes, so it was multi-layered.
It was multi-layered, multifaceted.
So on what level you can have person-to-person reconciliation, but again, people, ordinary citizens, reconciling themselves to the facts as we knew them. So you begin to understand, I suppose, you begin to get facts. And
precisely, precisely. Learning itself is a process of reconciliation. If you don't know something and you go to the library or you go online to investigate it and you find the information that you are seeking, that information and your mind have been reconciled. You know, so it's the same way with the truth-seeking and truth propagation process. Knowing the truth is a form of reconciliation because then ignorance is out, knowledge is in.
That's it. So this would lead me to, how can we or how should we measure the impact of the TRRC?
Well,
really, I suppose some of us, we need to have, you know, we are journalists, sort of benchmarks. We need to know what would qualify as success in the longer term, and what would, you know, not so qualify as success, what could be seen as a failure. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's a very big question. There has to be yardsticks, as you put it. There has to be signposts or signs or symbols in the society that would indicate that this process has been a success. Now, the Truth Commission process or transitional justice process in general are supposed to be transformative. They are supposed to bring about transformations, changes in society that are visible. Now, if you look at the TRRC process, we can say that it has brought about a lot of transformative changes in the society. For example, the Never Again campaign, the Never Again concept is deeply embedded in the Gambian psyche right now. Everybody knows about Never Again. Everybody is determined to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now,
but would you as bold as to say that it's deeply embedded now? I know that we say it a lot, but maybe before we can test it, we really need a challenge. When you are in peacetime, you know, it's nice. You know, you can imagine any scenario and say, I will take the moral angle and stuff like that. But once you are in the situation, it's an entirely different ball game. So we do not know yet.
Right. What we do know is that the concept of Never Again is widely known in Gambian society. That people are determined to make sure that what happened here is not going to happen. Of course, the test is going to happen when something happens. Now, that is one aspect of a success, you know, that we are able to popularize the notion, the concept of Never Again, and make it a habit of mind. We've seen CSOs, Tango, and others come forward, come out, and carry out demonstrations on Never Again. That is a significant element or sign of success. The other thing is that there are lots of victim-led organizations in the society now that cropped up, that popped up, that happened during the TRRC process. We can't claim 100% credit for those victim organizations, but we do know that the TRRC process did lead to or encourage victims to come together and create some of these organizations. Now, the other thing is that, and this is very important, you know, in terms of the international impact of the Commission, being a part of the process from the beginning to now, I know that the TRRC is acclaimed universally as a success story, as a truth commission that has done a lot in terms of bringing about the knowledge of what happened, in terms of just going according to plan and exposing all of the wrongs that happened and making a lot of material available. Online, you can go today as we speak and search on Google and YouTube and find any of the hearings. Now that is a first in world Truth Commission history. We are considered a model of truth commissions. Just recently, always actually, I get contacted by international organizations who want to know more about the TRRC and who want to actually cite the Gambia as a country of reference for a successful truth commission. So these are just some of the issues that one can point to and say we have registered some success. Of course, in the longer term, the ultimate success of the Truth Commission process would depend on the implementation of the recommendations. Those cannot be left out. Now, every Truth Commission work has two phases. There is the truth-seeking phase, and then there is the implementation phase. Right now, we are in the implementation phase. And if the implementation phase doesn't go as required, then a lot would be left to be decided in terms of the success of the Truth Commission.
That's it. And when we look at the records of other truth commissions, the implementation was sort of come many times under criticism.
Oh, yes.
That's risk is very much in this as well.
Oh, yes.
That's it. But for the so-called, I've heard this criticism as well, for the purposes of never again, there's a suggestion that the TRRC report didn't go deeply enough into the underlying causes. Because if you're gonna sort of create a new mindset, create a new ecology, where we can read the signs of actually, how did we go from one of the most democratic to being one of the most despotic, as it were? There's a journey. So maybe if it's going to be never again, then people must learn certain lessons from there, the underlying causes, so you can identify the telltale signs when they begin, be it at my place of work, or in my neighborhood, or anywhere. What do you say to that?
Right, there is an element of truth in that for two main reasons. One is that the Truth Commission had a limited mandate period. It wasn't an institution that was permanent, that was expected to serve to last for 10 years. Even if it lasted 10 years, it still would have been difficult to identify all of the underlying causes of the dictatorship. But if you look at the recommendations of the Commission, in terms of institutional failures, in terms of policy failures, the Commission has identified quite a lot of some of those underlying factors, things that enabled Yahya Jammeh to become a dictator. The Never Again campaign was also targeted at this mindset that I told you about, which was a key enabling factor of the dictatorship, where people feel that they are helpless in the face of the state, in the face of the government. So the civic culture needs to be evolved. It needs to be developed a lot. And again, because of the limited mandate period we had, because of the limited resources we had, it was not possible to go deep into all of the enabling factors. That is why it's very important for there to be a successor mechanism to the Truth Commission that will then continue not only the investigation. The investigations can be done by the state, but there are many, many other factors that contributed to the creation of a dictatorship in the Gambia that can be handled by a successor mechanism.
Absolutely. But I wonder, though, you as an historian, sitting there listening to the testimonies, right. Be it institutionally, how things began to be subverted, perverted, whatever. As an historian, did it change sort of the way you do history, or did it change certain ideas you had about history? Did it change you in that way as an historian, either your methods or your precepts or whatever? Did it have any impact on you as an historian, I wonder, listening to all of the testimonies?
Well, it did have a lot of impact on me as a human being, as a person.
All right.
Historical methods are varied and complex, and you cannot just change them overnight. There are ways of doing research and ways of putting together the information. What it did was bring out a lot of historical material that I did not know before. I knew I was in the struggle. I was in exile for 17 years. I was in the struggle, so I knew a lot of the human rights violations that were happening, like many other Gambians. But there were certain things that I did not know, both about the human personality, the human capacity for cruelty, for example, that we've seen. We've seen unbelievably cruel actions being done by Gambians. And before the Truth Commission process started, a lot of people said, well, these things were committed by Casamance rebels, by rebels from Liberia, mercenaries, and so on and so forth. So the fact that the Gambian is merely human and is capable of doing the type of cruel things that were done in Nazi Germany or other countries was a revelation to me. Not entirely new, because I've read about societies that went that way, that were very peaceful, and then once the conditions provided or presented themselves, they were transformed into beasts that could kill each other and do horrible things to each other. But it did increase my historical knowledge. It did not change my nature and methods as a historian, because those are beyond my capacity to change, actually. Now, I like to think of the TRRC process as an oral history project. It is an oral history project. Just of a different sort, but it has a lot of the elements of oral history, where people come and actually tell stories about what happened to them in the past.
Yep, absolutely. I only asked that because we're talking to a lot of people, even when the testimonies started, when witnesses started to come in to give their testimonies, a lot of people were sort of having a rethink about what Gambia means, what Gambianness means. Yeah. A lot of people were really surprised, I have to say, because I remember before the commissions and before the fall of Jammeh, we used to say that actually we don't think that Gambians are doing all of these things we hear. We thought they were foreigners.
Right.
So there was that shock,
right,
really in who we are. So I was wondering if you had a similar metamorphosis, if you like, in one's Gambianness, can I call it that, and one's view of who we are as citizens, as neighbors. We talk about, we all one family. Extraordinary if we can do the sort of things we did to one another, still calling ourselves family.
Right. It was shocking to any sensible and sane person. The things that happened here, that were done to Gambians by their fellow Gambians, is shocking. You can't imagine people just doing the horrible things that the junglers did, for example, to almost all of their victims. Like you said before the commission, there was this feeling that some of these things are done by foreigners. But what it tells me is that human nature is human nature, and that the human capacity for cruelty, transcends ethnic, tribal, nationalistic lines. Human beings are human beings, and they could become beasts if the conditions permit. So we should be very careful about what we think we can't do as human beings. Let's just pray and hope and work very hard to prevent the rise of circumstances and conditions that could motivate people to do certain things. Because it was shocking. Yes, it was shocking. It was transformative in very profound ways.
That's it. Yeah. So now, when you look sort of going forward, I mean, we are constantly talking about how we cannot really do implementation. We are always found wanting in one form or another in many different areas, actually, found wanting on the implementation. So even though the government appears to have committed itself to most of the recommendations, but it will depend on, in the end, sort of the muscle, having the resources. Having the even the will, you just never know, and the resources as well to implement some of this, especially regarding the reparations, which is quite complex in itself as well. It just doesn't mean giving them money; it could mean all sorts of things. So, What threats, what do you see going forward?
Mm. Well, one of the things that we also anticipated at the beginning of the TRRC process, and we took some measures to counter that, is that excuse me, Truth Commission recommendations are generally not fully implemented. They are generally only partially implemented. And in countries where everything was left to the end of the process under recommendations, normally nothing much was happened in terms of transformative effects of the Truth Commission process on the society. So one of the things that led us to launch our outreach activities and the Never Again campaign was also to minimize the effects of the non-implementation of the recommendations. I think right now what needs to happen is that there needs to be a very clear strategic implementation plan for the recommendations. There has to be a plan that someone can go to and say, okay, this is the plan, this is the timeline for the implementation of the recommendations. And then, perhaps more importantly, there needs to be an implementation agency or implementing agency, an agency that would be responsible for coordinating the implementation efforts. The government has said that they will do it, and they probably want to do it, but apart from the lack of resources that they complain about, they would not also be able to implement a lot of the recommendations. Some of them will have to be implemented by the government, especially the legal aspects of the recommendations, the institutional reform aspects. But the great majority of the recommendations of the Commission are not legal in nature. They are mostly social. They are mostly, issues of outreach and conversations that need to happen between religions, between ethnic groups, between communities, to make sure that we create greater social cohesion and the country moves forward. But like I said, two elements have to happen, or three. The political will of the government has to be there. If the government is really genuine, if they really mean to implement the recommendations, there's a lot of international goodwill right now, that I can tell you, a lot of international goodwill. And if the government reaches out, as they should, to international partners, a lot of them, not only bilateral, multilateral partners, but also a lot of international organizations are invested in Truth Commission processes, and they are invested in particular on the TRRC process in Gambia. I think they should be able to gain, to get the resources that they would need to implement some of the key recommendations, including reparations. But first, there has to be the political will for that to happen. There has to be an implementing agency. I know that the Commission has recommended that the government works with the National Human Rights Commission, especially when it comes to the training of security officers in international law and human rights law and the rule of law, etc. That can happen, that can go ahead. But there needs to be an independent, implementing agency that would coordinate the entire process. If that doesn't happen, then I'm afraid things are just going to fritter away. Like in other countries.
So it seems to me that you're saying that for us to know whether the government really has got the political will, these are some of the yardsticks. Yes, as we were talking about, some of the things that we need to do, and that would be the implementing agency. These are some of the yardsticks. Yes, as we were talking about, some of the things that we need to do, and that would be the implementing agency. And
a strategic plan for implementation, a timeline for some of the issues. We have to be able to focus. We have to know we are going to do this and this and this and this within this period. We cannot just say we'll implement the recommendations and sit back. That wouldn't do it. It takes political will, it takes planning, it takes concrete action to actually do the things that need to be done. And most of the things that need to be done are really not difficult, and they do not require a lot of resources. They can be done, from now. Like right now, the government should have been implementing some of the recommendations with coordination with the victims' organizations. They are very eager to help. The victim organizations in this country, they are very eager to participate in this process. The international community, I know there are agencies in this country or agencies outside the country that are very eager to assist with implementing some of the recommendations concerning witchcraft, for example, the stigma concerning sexual and gender-based violence, for example, concerning HIV/AIDS, for example, and the remodeling of the prisons, the creation of more space for prisoners. Those are things that can be done. You don't require lots of money to do that. As far as the reparations are concerned, they will require money, but it's not a lot of money. If you look at it, in the broader perspective, you're talking about maybe $6 million, $7 million that would need to take care of the reparations. And the government should be able to get at least part of it now, and then as time goes on, to get more of it now. But more importantly, there has to be a direction. There has to be an agency, and then there has to be a clear-cut direction on how to move forward.
That's it. But I wonder whether they see it as sort of a kind of shortcoming of these commissions, where in the end, there's really no power that can force anything. It will just depend on what the government wants to implement or not. Do you see that as one of the shortcomings, as it were, of these commissions in many ways? There are no legal instruments. There's really no pressure, no power that can make you implement anything.
Well, your conscience should be power enough. I mean, there is no way to force a government. The government wasn't forced to create the Truth Commission. And so there is no way, there is no need for somebody to impose a law on them to say you must implement. But your word, the national interest, should be enough. You are a state, you are a government, you are there to safeguard the national interest, you are there to build a society for the better. So I don't think there is the need for anyone to say you must implement this. You cannot do that. It has not been done anywhere. But your conscience, the truth that you set out to find out, should be able to motivate you to do the right thing by the people, by the country, as the servant of the people, as in the service of the nation. You don't need to be forced to do anything. You have done it, you've said you will do it, do it. That's what you are paid to do. It's actually at some level an obligation for the government to implement the recommendations of a Truth Commission, not only in Gambia, because the government is employed by the nation, by the people. They are paid by the nation, by the people. And so if you look at it from that angle, which is a bit tricky, you could say that implementing the recommendations of a Truth Commission is an obligation on the government.
That's it. But somehow you see that politics always gets in the way. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people invoke, remember, the draft constitution, yeah. that sort of thing. So it depends on certain political factors. Yeah. What the government will do, will depend on political compromises that they may have to do to stay in power. In the end, isn't that the case, really?
Yeah, that's the reality that we face. It's not the ideal reality. It's not what should happen. What should happen is that the government is committed to a process of creating a Truth Commission, finding out the truth, with a view to do what? Just to throw the recommendations away? No, to implement them. For what? For the betterment of the society and the nation. And no amount of political expediency should convince any government or any political leader to place their own personal political interests above the national interest. That would be a moral. I know morality is not normally part of politics, but it should be. You are elected to serve the country to the best of your ability and in the best interest of the nation. So anything that you should do in the interest of the country, you should do, even if it is against you. I have a very radical view of politics. I would say that a government should be able to go to the people and tell them, look, you can kick us out. We are your servants. If we don't serve you, you can kick us out. But of course, perhaps we haven't reached that level of radicalism yet, if you like, in African political cultures at least, where you empower the people, because lack of empowerment, popular empowerment, is one of the key enablers of dictatorship in this society and in other societies. Now, if you don't empower the people as the way you should, hardship will empower them. The difficulties will empower them. And when that happens, what you see is something like what you see in Sri Lanka today. Spontaneous eruption of violent protests that would cause more harm to the people, but also to the nation and the state. So I think that the government, whether it's the Gambia government or another government that sets up a Truth Commission, should just go ahead and do the right thing and implement the recommendations of the Commission. Maybe not all of them, but implement the great majority of them. is possible, even without a lot of resources.
Absolutely. I'm talking about morality and politics. I think it was de Gaulle who once remarked that really at bottom, every political decision is a moral one.
Exactly.
in many ways. Yes. So this is it. There are so many ifs. If this, whether they will do that, many variables, as it were, many contingencies, we don't know, uncertainties, as it were. But the best, sort of, the optimal sort of outcome that the TRRC can have. Let's indulge our fantasies here. How else can I put it? So what are the best, most optimal outcomes you see for this TRRC?
Well, the ultimate rationale, the ultimate reason for the creation of a Truth Commission anywhere, and especially the TRRC, is to prevent a recurrence of what happened, so that dictatorship doesn't happen in this country again. That would be the number one rationale. Under dictatorship, you can have human rights violations of all kinds. You can have all kinds of abuses of public office. So essentially, the whole idea is to prevent the recurrence of dictatorship. So if we can achieve that, then we would have achieved the optimum result for the Truth Commission. But then that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens, with a lot of other factors. That would include the implementation of recommendations on social cohesion, recommendations on reparations, recommendations on prosecutions, a lot of recommendations. Almost all the recommendations would need to be implemented to some extent, and a changing of the mindset of the majority of Gambians, which still, unfortunately, in spite of some of the efforts that the Commission made, are still not moved very much. The people still see Eman Sekunda. It's a huge task that we have to make sure that the transitional justice process here succeeds. We have to do a lot of things, some of which are outside of the TRRC recommendations, but that are required to happen.
Absolutely. But I have to say here, Dr. Jala, when one looks at history, though, there's not much hope in believing that any of that will happen. It's there. Never again. That was since Nuremberg, wasn't it? But afterwards, we've had genocides all over the place. Not long ago in Rwanda, 1994. So it's extraordinary how do we really learn? Historians, what are we supposed to learn from history? Sometimes do we forget lessons? Are we condemned to repeat the old sins? I'm not sure. Because when I hear about historians telling us about the cyclical nature of history or life, whatever, then I'm like, what you're saying is that we're going to repeat these things.
Well, there is a joke among historians that one of history's greatest lessons is that men never learn from history, or humans never learn from history. We do learn from history, but that reality, shouldn't preclude the possibility that a particular society, Gambian society, a small, beautiful society, would be determined to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. We can do it. We can do it. I'm optimistic that we can do it. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It wouldn't happen overnight. But if there is the political will and the national will to make sure that dictatorship doesn't happen here again, that human rights violations are kept at a minimum, because even if you have all the laws and all the reforms in the world, there will still be individuals who would be prone to committing human rights violations. But at the state as an abuser, chronic abuser of human rights violations, that can be prevented. I think that history is not a very good indicator of what should happen in the future. So that is why, especially in the TRRC process, we conceived of the Commission as Janus faced, as facing the past and facing the future. Facing the past to find out what happened, but facing the future to ensure that what happened in the past doesn't happen again in the future. It can be done. It's not going to be easy. It might not happen. But what I'm saying is, if the conditions are right, if we have the political will, the state that has the political will to make it happen, it could assist the nation as the director of the future of this country.
That's it. So there's that element of the political will. What about us civil society? Because we do learn from historians, and when you look at the US, Britain, anywhere, it's really civil society that developed democracy.
Yes.
Politicians will never really, they always want power to themselves. It's always people who really force them to relinquish. So gradually we've been giving ground to people. So it's really us in a sense that can really change the political will.
Absolutely, yes. The civil society would be very, very instrumental in bringing about the desired changes, in this country. And I think there is a visible movement towards that. It's not very powerful right now. I think it would be encouraged. The more constructive actions are taken by the government, the more the civil society organizations are empowered or encouraged to participate, in the political destiny of this country, the more we are likely to see a state that could be held responsible. Also, I mean, I normally wouldn't buy into the generalization of politicians as always, there would be exceptions, very few. You can count them on the finger of your hand, very few. Around the world, politicians or leaders who would place the national interest above their own personal interest. And that could happen here. I don't know if it has happened yet, but it certainly can happen going forward.
Exactly, and you ending there with the political, I remember, was it during the presidential elections around that period when we had the manifesto of an unlikely candidate?
Yes.
and now this is gone. What, back to academia, going into politics? Where do you see Dr. Jallow next? Where should we expect to see Dr. Jallow next?
Well, I leave my options open. Right now, the TRRC process is over. I'm still around here. I haven't picked up regular employment yet, if you like. So I might go back to academia. I might go back to transitional justice work, which is the other career path that the TRRC opened for me. Before the TRRC, I couldn't have imagined myself working in transitional justice. But now, I have two career paths that I can follow. Politics, I might go into it at some point. I don't think now is the time that I can go into it because of perhaps circumstances beyond my control. But we can't say that we will not go into politics. That would be self-defeating. I think if you think that you have some ideas that might be able to help the country, your country, there's nothing wrong with proposing yourself, suggesting that, look, I have these ideas, I think I can help, and see if the people trust you enough to grant you their support, then you see what you can do. So, but politics is not now, certainly it's not now. Academia, it could happen anytime. Transitional justice work, it could happen anytime.
That's it. But when you look at the political landscape here, what do you think it lacks?
Civic awareness, civic education, popular empowerment. The fact that the people are still not sure of the extent of their power, that they are able to hold their government accountable, that they should hold their government accountable. So the reconciliation that we tried to do, regarding political perception and political reality had very limited success because of the limited time period that the Commission had, the limited resources that we had. But that is work that needs to happen. People need to be empowered. People need to know, I know a lot of people will say, oh, people know what they want. It's not about what they want. It's about knowing their power, knowing their rights, knowing their constitution, and they could learn about their constitution in our local languages. They don't have to know English or French to understand concepts of within the constitution or to understand the United Nations system or the international system. So there was an idea that I advocated at some point, not long ago, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and that is the idea of the nation school, that the entire nation could be turned into one big university campus. And there would be a dedicated institution that would be dedicated to civic education and a lot of other things, including teaching of Gambian studies, Gambian history, and a lot of other things. So I think that, civic awareness is the missing element.
That's the key. But when I look at notions like that, you know that that's a longer term project, isn't it? That awareness, some people do even say there's perhaps a generational game. There's certain things you need to change, certain attitudes, certain norms. Perhaps that could be compatible with institutional life. The way we want to do institutional life, having notions like fairness, competence built into it, not kind of being a kind of extension of our living room because of the way we are normatively. So that would take time, wouldn't it? No, in the short term, what do I do? That is why development under democratic conditions is just so slow. It's easier for the dictator. He doesn't have to do any of that. When he's serious, he can achieve far more very quickly than the other bit. This is our dilemma, isn't it? Democratic development is extremely slow. How long would it take you? 20 years?
No, to some extent, I think giving the people the knowledge, the level of knowledge they require to be able to hold their government accountable shouldn't take more than a year or two. If you have the right channels of communication, you have you really invest your mind in it. It would take time, certainly in the long term. But then, a sufficient number of people can be sensitized and socialized, if you like, to the extent that they would be able to hold their government accountable. They wouldn't know everything they need to know, but they would know enough to know that power resides in them and that the government is their servant.
Absolutely, but it all sounds so reasonable. I always remember Dr. David Hume. But man, we are driven more by passions than reason. That is our problem.
It's difficult sometimes to draw a line between passion and reason. Because our reasons are driven by passion, our passions are driven by reason, however unreasonable the reason is. So
you see, it gets more complex.
It does.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babagala Jala, for that really wonderful, nice discussion. I truly enjoyed it. Really, former executive secretary of the TRRC. So, what does the future hold? Only time will tell. Thank you very much for joining us on Drive Time. On the, what do I keep saying, Drive Time show? That's my radio show on the Viewpoint, you see? Until next time, I'm Umudumbuj. Goodbye.